Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of World of Sumo presents Inside the Dohyo. Today we have an awesome episode for you all on amateur sumo. I'm joined today with two veterans of the sport, so absolutely going to be a bag full of information for everybody that wants to know a wee bit more about such an important part of the world of sumo. I'm joined with my usual co-host, John Traill, who is pretty much the president of everything sumo in Australia, as you already know, the Oceania Sumo Union, VP the International Sumo Federation, and president of Australian Sumo, and my normal co-host. And joining us with him today, we've got Adam Lloyd, a personal friend of mine as well as John is. Adam is a veteran of British sumo, well over 10 years in the sport, very experienced guy, very knowledgeable. He came third in the Europeans in Budapest in the early 2010s. So both guys with their experience, their knowledge and their accolades alone is just going to be a mix for a great show for us today. Thanks very much for joining me, guys. Adam, thanks for being here, mate. I really appreciate you joining me and John for this episode.
Yeah, no problems. Thanks for having us, Scott. I just wish we could have scheduled it a little bit earlier, but obviously it's been quite problematic in terms of getting us all together at the same time.
Aye. We can blame John for that because he's the one in Australia, so we'll just blame him for that. Yep. Aye. Yep. So, guys, we'll just get straight into it because the day we're here, I mean, I know I do amateur, so I'm only a couple of years into the sport, so I can only give so much. What you two guys can offer us here today is definitely one that everybody should be listening to, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and maybe a lot of different styles, and people might be getting a wee bit confused about the world of amateur sumo. So hopefully we can clear some of that up today and bring a wee bit of an interesting show. So amateur sumo, guys, the history, John, what is the history of amateur sumo? Can you give us some facts on that, mate?
Well, amateur sumo's been around for a long time. It basically, I mean, you've had professional sumo, which everybody knows the history of that and the origins of it. But I think it was the early, about a century ago, that they started to have. I think the oldest amateur championships was in about 1915. So they're still doing it during the war. There was a lot even happening whilst the war was on in POW camps, on battleships. There's a few cool photos out there. And so then the Japan Sumo Federation was established in about 1946. And they have quite a few different championships each year. And that's where we see a lot of the new guys come from amateur sumo into pro sumo. So they have regional tournaments. They have an all Japan business group sumo championships, like corporate sumo. They have national championships. They have youth championships. They have all different parts of Japan. I think they even have a group of yummy mummies, some part of Japan where the mothers all do sumo with each other. And they've got the Wanpaku Sumo, which is the what they call naughty sumo for the kids. And so in about 1980, they had the first All Japan Amateur Sumo Championships, where they invited some overseas teams to compete. I think that was probably John Jakes might have been involved with some of that. And then Brazil have had amateur sumo for a long time, so they were the first to sort of jump in with the International Federation, which then formed in about, I think it was the early, is it 1992? It was when the first World Championships started. And they signed up a lot of different countries from around the world and took a lot of people from judo and threw a bit of money at it. The mysterious benefactor was an interesting character, sort of war criminal yakuza, but we didn't know that, we didn't care. And it's been growing ever since.
Right, so basically there is a plethora of amateur sumo history right along with Ozumo history, and it's definitely something that people should look more into because amateur sumo's grown in such a way lately and all that there's a lot of new opinions and new faces and all that. So see a wee bit of looking back at the history can definitely let you earn a wee bit of a better respect for the sport that you're trying to learn about. So you guys are obviously veterans in your own countries. So Adam, do you obviously want to give us a wee bit of the background on British sumo history and how you got into British sumo?
Yeah, so Great Britain sumo has been happening for probably nearly 2 decades. Originally, it was a guy called Sid Ho, who was a top flight judoka who had spent a lot of time out in Japan training in judo, and he fell in love with sumo, having never really known what it was before. He assembled a group of heavyweight guys over here in Britain to start training in sumo and get across to Japan and compete. Sid is no longer with us, unfortunately, and he sort of passed over the reins to a guy called Steve Pateman. Steve is still both the head coach for the British national team and the president of British Sumo. Steve's background is, again, he was a high-level judoka. He'd done a bit of boxing and a bit of Olympic-style wrestling. You know, he's quite an accomplished grappler, martial artist, whatever you want to call it. And since probably about 15 years ago, Steve's headed up everything in Great Britain. It is challenging over here in Great Britain for a variety of reasons. I think the big one is funding. The way the British sports organisations operate is different to a number of other countries. You know, just to be affiliated to one of the government bodies, which is either a company called Sport England or UK Sport, is quite a challenging and lengthy process. So funding's been an issue in terms of getting that recognition and funding from the government bodies. Obviously, that has an impact on how the sport can develop here, not only in terms of getting people to a high standard, but just generally increasing participation rates as well is hampered. You know, you don't have a lot of money to do that, which is in quite contrast. You know, I'll take you to the Netherlands, Holland. At one point, they had bags of money flying people to every competition. You know, I remember one time a friend of mine, a Dutch sumo guy, Peter, had messaged me, and at a week's notice, he was flying out to Argentina to compete. You know, so it's been problematic in the UK. I know we're not the only country. I know France has struggled and still is. I speak to a guy in Portugal. Portugal struggle again with government recognition and funding, which is sad. I believe the sport has a lot of potential. I've probably introduced, you know, maybe 50 different people to the sport. Pretty much all have loved it and wanted to get involved more.
Me included.
Train more, compete more. Yeah. Not just in college. So I'm a university lecturer by profession, which obviously gives me access to a lot of people. I lecture in sports science and sports coaching. It gives me access to a lot of sporty and athletic individuals. Loads of students, really keen. But again, when they realise the amount of travelling involved just to participate in the sport, and then, you know, you get infrequent competitions because of the limited numbers we have over here participating, and then the fact you've got to get abroad and quite a lot of the time you're funding that out of your own pocket, it naturally provides obstacles, especially for students who have probably not got much money as it is because of all the debt they're acquiring to further their education and the job prospects, really.
Aye. Well, that's fair enough, and I can obviously attest to that because I come through the same scene as you in British sumo. Obviously, again, I'm only a couple of years in. John, what about Australian sumo, mate? What's a wee bit of the history? Like, who was the one that kicked that off in Australia and then ended up leading to you now taking it over, mate?
I never actually met him, but his name was on the first dojo we had. I think he was from judo, John Peters, and that was a great dojo because it was made of canvas and you could slide on it. quite easily, whereas the vinyl ones you can't really slide unless you put socks on. And it had Velcro, a Velcro tawara, so that was nice and easy until the Velcro got a bit too much hair stuck on it. It wouldn't stay in place, or it was starting to buckle up. So yeah, the like a lot of countries, they approached all the judoka, and yeah, it was a bit sad that a lot of them disappeared after the money and the free trips ran out. Especially Fiji were very talented, but yeah, they didn't want to know. They just wanted handouts. In Oceania, there's a bit of a cargo cult mentality. Just look to the skies and hope that the goodies come down. And yeah, it is difficult for people to get visas, especially when some of them have a history of overstaying their visas and wanting to stay in Australia and things. So that can be a problem, and also just the distances and yeah, there aren't that many flights out so often, but we've got plenty of them on shore we can use. So yeah, it's interesting what Adam said about with the universities as well. That would have been the perfect place to build sumo and to fund it, and that was one of the only times the international federations have bothered to get in touch with us to see how things work at university. But the problem with that, it's very strong in Japan. They have teams and they have the network and they have the old boys and they have funding, they have chunko rooms, they have their own stables. Whereas when I was at university, we used to have compulsory student unionism, and a lot of you had to pay a certain amount, and we got this amazing amount of cash every time we had a fundraiser. They said they'd double it, so we were dealing with sometimes millions of dollars. Like for the clubs I was involved with, skiing, sailing,
Millions,
windsurfing,
like actual millions.
Like we would literally raise $500,000 and then they'd match it, and yeah, it was a bit of corruption going on there, and I think that I always made sure that it all got shared around. But some people go, oh, we'd have to take a few extra weeks at the snow to do a bit of scouting. But yeah, the problem with the university teams in other countries apart from Japan is that you have to keep replenishing the people every couple of years. So you really need someone on campus the whole time, a perpetual student. So that's quite difficult.
So how did you end up taking over? Like, how did you end up becoming the president of Australian Sumo and like getting involved in that and doing that? Was that was that in Japan? Like, was that when you were in Japan? Is that how you first got involved in sumo to begin with?
No, it was when I came back from Japan. It was really hard to find anything, even in the newspapers. I used to have to go into the Japan Foundation to photocopy their newspapers and hope that something was in there about sumo. So the first president was a man, Ivor Endicott Davies, who was originally a judoka from New Zealand, and they boycotted the Olympics in 1980 when he was meant to go, with the Moscow Olympics, and yeah, it kind of doesn't mean much now. And then it was taken over by another university scholar, Peter Armstrong, who went to Waseda University, so he had strong ties with Japan, and he managed to get Konishiki out to train us one time. And then he retired, and we passed the baton to Katrina Watts, who she's fantastic. She was an NHK commentator for about 20 years, and she actually worked in university too. She was a professor in Kobe, and yeah, well, then she unfortunately got a little bit ill. She's all recovered now, but she had to she had to cut off her trademark long hair, and yeah, then I took over from that. So we have elections all the time. I try to see if anyone else wants to step up and become president. It's a lot of responsibility. Trying to raise money is difficult. I used to be able to raise about $5,000 in a night with some of the parties we had. Being a financial advisor, the fund managers I could just get on the phone, make a few phone calls, and they'd courier a lot of stuff that I could raffle off, auction off. A really good, golf sets, wine, fishing gear, sake, anything they wanted. But with the GFC, that stopped everything. And but that was a fantastic night. Sushi, sumo, sake night. I sort of changed it every year. Like we had.
Aye, I can remember you telling me about them, mate. That you used to do them.
Or you could eat chunko, and we'd go through two 18-litre casks of sake. It was unlimited sake, and that was a fantastic night. So yeah, at the moment it's going to be difficult going forward without any government funding, and without being able to hold any of the demonstrations that we do. We had to cancel a couple of cherry blossom festivals and things like that. That's when we get a lot of interest in sumo.
So there is, I mean, there you go, in Britain and Australia and in many other countries, there's a deep history of amateur sumo, and it all originates with a really strong connection to Japan. I mean, like, even for yours, John, and then Sid Hoare, for you there, Adam, it was all really strong connections. So it does definitely all come from the same place. Adam, let me ask you this, mate. In your opinion, how would you say amateur sumo has developed in the last 20 years? Like, meaning, like, how popular it's got, how many people are competing and sticking into it, and the numbers at international competitions?
Yeah, so since I've been involved, I've seen a definite increase in participation numbers, but it's isolated to specific countries. And it's quite typically those countries that have a well-funded system. You know, every year the Russians are having bigger, better, more extravagant competitions. It's somewhere I'd definitely like to get out and compete myself. It looks amazing. They've got youth programs popping up left, right, and centre all over the place. You see increases all the time in Poland, in Hungary. Obviously, myself being European, my knowledge is a lot more stronger in terms of European sumo than it is globally. John's more of a global expert than I am. But yeah, it's definitely growing. But there is quite a strange thing that occurs where you see countries getting funds or being quite prolific. The Netherlands, Holland, they were around competing left, right, and centre everywhere. It seemingly disappeared in Holland now. They haven't been to any major competitions. The guys that I befriended are not really participating in sumo anymore since the funding is gone. It was the same, you know, Macedonia rocked up some real good fighters, really good fighters. They were around for 3 or 4 years. Medaling at European Championships. Again, Macedonia's gone off the radar. They no longer seem to be around. So it's something that is both interesting but very worrying. That sumo clearly has there is an appetite for sumo in a lot of countries, and people get off their asses and actually make it happen. But inevitably, this only has a limited longevity to it, and that they seem to disappear after a few years. You know, apart from one of the British heavyweights at the moment, a guy called Mandeep Kundi, there's not many Brits getting out abroad. Mandeep's done quite well in terms of self-publicising himself, getting some money through a little bit of sponsorship, so he's abroad. But otherwise, a lot of people may say, you know, Great Britain have disappeared. They've not been around to many competitions lately. It's not the case. It's happening on the ground in the country. You know, I'm saying it's not there in Macedonia. It might well be. Do you know what I mean? They're just not out in the wider picture, funding themselves, getting abroad. But there could be quite a good scene there. But yeah, you know, it's really developing. There's more and more names being put around, more and more events. And I was speaking on WhatsApp about 3 or 4 nights ago to Razul Hazanov, one of the top guys in Azerbaijan sumo, and he'd sent me a list. You know, he's in Romania, Germany, Poland, and Russia in the next 2 months. So, you know, there's competitions happening all the time. So it's definitely growing, definitely becoming more popular. I think that's a lot to do with things like World of Sumo that are out there on social media, highlighting to people that you can get involved. Obviously, global communication's better. You can speak to people and really get on with stuff. So yeah, it's definitely growing. I think there's potential for it to grow a hell of a lot more. But there's a lot of different factors and dynamics involved as to how far it can actually go as an amateur sport.
Right. So, see, in Britain, are you planning on getting back into competing properly for a while, or what's your plans for you competing alone now? Like, what's your single plans for that?
Yeah, so I did a couple of years away where I just dabbled in sumo. 2 kids. I went back to complete a second degree at the age of 30. Working part-time, mortgages, kids to look after, house to run. It became quite challenging for me to get abroad. So I sort of took a little bit of a backward step, maybe 3 or 4 years. Back in it now, been down, competed last month in the British minus 100 kilo class. I'm sure a lot of people don't even realise maybe amateur sumo is in weight classes. Took the gold in that, which was good. Some very stiff competition. Either the competition's got better in the UK or I'm not at my best. So yeah, it's going well. I aim to get out. I'm hoping that the rescheduled World Championships, which were scheduled for Poland, will be in Poland again. It'll be nice for somewhere close. Typically they've been out in Ulaanbaatar, Tokyo, Osaka, Hong Kong.
Aye.
When you're paying for it yourself, it's a big chunky proportion, and you've always got family commitments or the wife saying, do we really need to be spending that on that? We could have I don't know, a loft conversion or get something redecorated. So you've got to marry it up a little bit, and it's got to be conducive to wider life. But it's something that I'm in on. I'll be competing. I'm trying to launch at the university I teach at, the first wrestling club at the university. That's been given the go ahead. Hopefully that'll start in October. Where we'll be doing some sumo. What I'm trying to do is introduce a variety of traditional wrestling styles to the students, giving them an option to compete in a variety of things. But yeah, sumo is the emphasis, getting more representation in the UK.
It's certainly become a lot more interesting, but there is a bit of a polarization opening up between the haves and the have-nots, or the wannabes. Sometimes the teams are made up of whoever can afford to be there, and I think I was saying it before. Some countries they're even having trouble with Mawashis. I remember one time 3 of them came out of the Congo. Two got lost along the way. One ended up in Japan, showed up about midnight, and they'd never even seen a Mawashi. And so we had to sort of translate to him via our friend from Switzerland, so speak a bit of French to him. Have to remember our schoolboy French. And so there are countries where they're paying money for gold medals, and that's when it's a little bit of, well, the competition's tough, but there's also a bit of brown paper bags exchanging hands. A lot of the organisers tend to get a bit emotional about elections and who's in control. It was quite surprising. Some of the rumoured amounts that I've heard that they get for medals are 30,000, 50,000, get an apartment. They're kind of set for life. I think they treat it like there are a lot of the Eastern European countries, even if they're countries in poverty, they still look after their athletes, and I suppose so sumo is must have a status where they obviously think any medals come with a lot of prestige. That's why the Europeans were the ones pushing for the extra weight categories, which you guys will be in. And that helps if you're struggling to maintain. The weight divisions were too big, really. They were it was 30 kilos, whereas in some other sports they have divisions every couple of kilos because it can make a difference. But that's the interesting thing with the weight is the difference with amateur sumo, but also I found with age as well. Normally you do get better as you get along, but unless you get injured. And there have been times when I think 2009 I was the oldest competitor at the World Games out of every sport, and I wasn't really that old. But then at the 2012 World Championships, I think there were about 15, 20 people older than me, some considerably older, because some of the Mongolians and the tougher Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstans, and they're quite old, and they were still competitive at whatever age. And that's Adam, that's one thing we also have in common is the sirum, which is the Korean sumo, Korean beach sumo, where they do it on sand. They tried to start it up quite successfully with, I think it was an oil billionaire paying for the footing some of the bills along with the Korean government, and they were getting people from a lot of different countries to come over to the World Championships, and they set an age limit of was it 30, Adam, or something?
Yeah, I'm not
40?
sure about that. I competed at the World Championships in Shiram, out in Frankfurt in Germany. What a competition! It was amazing. Everything was funded. Your flights were funded. Your hotel was funded. It was myself and a guy called Jason went over to represent GB, and then 2 expat Koreans who were now living in London. They came with us. So Jason's quite a fussy eater, doesn't like much food, and we're having some Korean barbecue food and he didn't like it, so he took himself to the McDonald's, came back, and then the Korean organisers were saying, where have you been? He said, I don't want to be rude, I'm not keen on the food, been to McDonald's. They even gave him his money for his McDonald's. It was brilliant. He felt so welcome in that. That lasted, there was a follow-up the following year out in Myanmar, Burma, Yangon, I think the capital is out there. I didn't make that one because my son was due. But wow, that again, seen on social media, it looked amazing. But again, it was unsustainable. They still haven't got pots of money to be doing it. So now it's up to the individual countries to fund it again. Pretty similar to sumo.
Yeah, it comes down to the passion of people that want to continue doing it. The handouts are wonderful. The first World Championships, they used to, here's your lunch money, and it was 20,000 yen, which is it buys a lot of ramen. And then so the Koreans, they wanted to have it. They thought sumo had an image problem with the weight, so they kept the maximum weight at 130 kilograms. So you saw these quite lean Mongolian giants doing everything they could to get under the weight limits. And yeah, that's always been the interesting things, people trying to cut weight. Sometimes I've seen guys having to lose. They've done their almost last weigh in. They're completely lean, and they have to run all night. And some of them nearly get hospitalised. One guy did check himself out of the hospital because he still wanted to compete. So it gets a little bit dangerous unless you know what you're doing. I used to be good at it. I can't anymore. 8 kilos in 24 hours was enough for me because it was starting to send me a bit mad. But yeah, got to have someone to help you with it. Now, so all the different weight divisions has opened up a lot more people that want to compete. And how long are some of the European Championships? They're taking a few days, aren't they? I remember the Ukrainians used to delay it with all their stupid antics of trying to delay the touchy eye. They think it makes the other guy tired if you stand there and piss them off and scratch your bum and sniff your fingers and scratch your nuts and things like that. But I think they've stopped that a bit now, haven't they, Adam?
Yeah, it was quite evident the last Europeans when I watched it in Kazan, Russia, a couple of months ago. There's still a lot of prattling about. There really was. A lot of mind games. There were certain countries as well. Obviously, amateur sumo doesn't have all the same ritualization as pro sumo, but there's a lot of etiquette still involved. Some countries seem to be disregarding that etiquette quite a bit. But the referees, if you want to call them Gyoji, were on at them, telling them this was inappropriate. But it was the same countries over and over again.
Yeah.
But again, it's the countries that are probably throwing money around to their athletes to win medals. So they're probably athletes taking every opportunity they can just to get that 1 millimeter advantage.
Yeah,
Right.
that's that's the disappointing thing. You see them acting like complete idiots. They don't. They're very, very strong and very skilled, and they're just annoying, and they delay the competition. Somebody used to tell me that all those all the poncing around used to almost make the tournaments take an extra day.
So that's a great point that the two of you brought up, and what the two of you said there. Really interesting about how there's certain political things that go on. We brown envelopes of money, and some people get funding, some people get big rewards if they do well. Whether other countries really struggle for a bit of funding, depending on the logistics of their country, or just a lot of stereotypical stuff and all gets brought into it, especially in this country. I mean, the weird looks I get when I tell people I do sumo is just crazy. I still enjoy it to this day, that a gate mouth thing. But let me ask you this. So do you guys see a difference in the styles at amateur sumo? Adam, would you say that across the world, amateur sumo has been changed where you go, whether it be depending on funding or what kind of lifestyle people are living or anything like that?
Oh, definitely, 100%. You know, you only have to watch amateur sumo and you can see a variety of different, I want to say philosophies. I don't know if philosophies is really the right word to be using, but ways in which people go about sumo. Yeah, you know, you can see it at a click of a button, different stuff. I think a lot of it is based on other styles of grappling and martial arts, which are predominant in the countries. So, for example, I've been out to Italy to compete. The Italian sumos are very heavily ingrained in judo clubs. There's a good partnership there. So the predominant other style of the lads playing sumo is judo. You know, it's straight to the belt and a lot of leg sweeps. So they use the strengths in judo to try and give them an advantage in sumo. So you go out somewhere like that, it's very different style as opposed to here in GB. You know, a lot of people in Great Britain who are into sumo are or have been rugby players.
Mm-hmm.
They're used to them big, heavy collisions. Steve Pateman, the head coach, really knowledgeable man, understands people as well as the sport of sumo, uses that to the strength. So one of the predominant things in Great Britain is a hard tachiai. Mm-hmm. Really fly out hard. I think that's because you're used to that, having been rugby. You know, I played rugby myself. You go out to somewhere like Hungary, very heavily influenced on Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestling. So the Hungarians' tachiai doesn't tend to be that aggressive or that hard. They want to wrestle, and they're bloody good at it as well. You know, Sandor Badosi, I think that's how you pronounce his name, is a silver medalist at the Olympics in Olympic wrestling. He's jumped in the sumo mawashi and competed. The Olympics that's just finished in Tokyo, Evelina Nikolova took a silver or a bronze in women's wrestling. She's been a European medalist in sumo herself. It goes on. You go to Georgia. Georgia have their own style of judo called Chiyodoba, which is almost like obviously your judo gi has long sleeves. Chiyodoba doesn't have any sleeves. You know, you've got Giga Gelashvili and Adam Okurashvili, both prolific in amateur sumo. Adam's an Olympian in judo. Giga's been, you know, flying all over the world, competing in the IGF. The last example would be Russia is probably the biggest amateur sumo nation aside from Japan. You know, a lot of the Russian national team are from an area called Tuva. Tuva is a very distant area of Russia, quite a long way from Moscow, and it's just north of Mongolia. You know, the people don't look Eurasian, they look more Asian, stereotypical Asian in feature. They have very similar sports to Mongolian sumo, the bok, Borat wrestling, and they also have the, I think it's hapsagi, how you pronounce it. And you do see, again, a totally different style of sumo from those guys. And those guys are dangerous as well. When you get in the ring with them, they can really wrestle.
Right. See that mate was a well educated answer, by the way. Well educated answer. John, what's your opinion on that, mate? What's your thoughts on the different styles as you stretch across the globe?
When you can, there are so many different styles that sometimes you can tell what it is, but as Adam was saying, they come from all around the world. So that's the petri dish that makes up sumo, in international sumo. Like for example, you can tell who's done judo. Like when I do judo against someone who's done Brazilian jiu-jitsu, they're easy to get on the ground, but then they crucify you. But so luckily we don't have any submission holds in sumo. And that's the other thing with the Greco-Roman. It doesn't translate very well. I know it's popular in America, and but they come out with their head down and wonder why they get slapped down. Like that's the old debate about Henko. We had a guy that came from a background like that. Every single time he came out in his Greco-Roman stance, and I hate doing a Henko. I have to, mate. Otherwise, I have to physically help you get into the right sumo position. And so I've also noticed there's a little bit of dangerous stuff creeping in, a lot of spear tackles style of sumo, and especially the younger guys. You've really got to be careful with people's necks. So that's one thing I don't like creeping in. And I noticed with the American sumo, their style is different again, because a lot of them are actually drawn to it because they are big, more morbidly obese, and they may or may not have been athletes before. So some of them are having a lot of trouble even touching the ground at the touchy eye. So they start up and they're using their bulk to do most of the work for them. So and their style's totally different again, because they've got their own interpretation of what they think sumo is. I mean, for me, we don't have in Oceania, that it's not a big tradition of, like in Europe, of the wrestling styles. There was an ancient Aboriginal style that we revived briefly, and that was fascinating, where we sort of walk around like kangaroos and dingoes and wombats. We called it combat wombat. But the American sumo's got its own sort of style to it that appeals to Americans.
They seem to be going for a huge entertainment factor along with the actual sport.
Again, on social media, it seems like the sport's exploding at amateur level in the United States. There's new clubs popping up all over the place, almost on a monthly basis.
Well, the America does have a good resource in that they've. I mean, it's taken a while to get to where it is. It should have been there a long time before. And it'll find its mark if they sort of stay a bit more open-minded and copy the Japanese style of doing things a little bit more. You've got the history of amateur sumo in America was glorious with Manny Yarborough, and I remember the team. I think between the three in the team, it was about 800 kilos or something, just with three guys. And the Hawaiians, they used to do quite well. And they've got Kenna Heffernan, who's been there. I think
he's now the coach of the Hawaiian Sumo Club, isn't he?
Yeah, he's
great guy.
Got a wrestling background. He's had we've been friends for a long time, and he's coaching the kids, and he's always so close to winning a medal. There's literally millimeters in it half the time.
There's a wee documentary about him on YouTube. I'll leave the link to it in the description of this video, guys, so you can all check him out as well. Sorry, on you go, John. I just wanted to add that in for everybody.
I think because at the moment the resources they've got with the professionals that they've got access to, sadly, Biamba passed away. They've got Yamamoto Yama, they've got Wakanoho. To be able to have access to those resources is just priceless. So I think a lot of the teams or around the different states have got to they're reinventing the wheel, and it's not quite round yet, or cherry blossom shaped. So they've got a bit of work to do. Just the crowds do like the razzmatazz, but you can still do that by keeping the roots of sumo and respecting that.
So, see, after speaking about all of that, what do you think that the future holds for amateur sumo, Adam? Do you think that the sport is going to continue to popularise the way it's doing? Because sumo has never been more popular, amateur and pro, than it is right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think it'll continue to grow. And I think the USA is one of the key markets for that. And obviously, Canada is starting to rear its head back into sumo with some guys up in Canada. And I think the North American market, just how big it is and how commercial it is essential for the growth. But it is good, you see new things happening. Like there's a bit more out in some of the Central Asian countries, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. It's coming up more and more there. I've seen a little bit of interest in India, which would be brilliant with their Kushti wrestlers, whatever you want to call it. And I think the other big area for growth is that Iran are on the scene. Such a big wrestling country. I think if Iran really focused on it, there'd be a tremendous asset to amateur sumo globally. But yeah, going back to your main point, I think it will continue to grow. I think it will become more popular, and fingers crossed it'll progress. We're seeing certain things jumping in now, which is showing its high level, with Olympians and people that have won medals in the Olympics getting involved. And that's testament to how good of a sport it is. The small, so bad things jumping in. We had 2 times lightweight world amateur sumo champion, a guy from Ukraine, tested positive for doping. And obviously, through WADA, World Anti-Doping Association, quite rightly received a ban. But, people are taking it that seriously, that they're willing to use performance-enhancing drugs in some cases. Thankfully, it's not commonplace at all. I will always be honest, I don't know of anybody in the UK that have taken it, or any banned substances. Speaking on different things through my rugby playing, loads of people doing rugby. It's just a different mentality, a different sport, and thankfully it's not creeping too much in. But it's good that we're getting that level of professionalism now, where there's regular doping tests, making the sport more credible, and I think that'll add to the overall credibility of amateur sumo.
Right, John, what do you think?
Yeah, with the doping, yeah, I think you're right. There are some countries that take it a bit seriously. I had to fight Vasily Margiev, who seems to be done for a steroid that increases your libido. I didn't know you could get that. I want some. Oh no, I don't need that. I don't need that at all. No. I thought it reduces it.
Aye.
But yeah, but these guys are lucky that the ban occurred over a time when there was no sumo happening. So they'll be back. And yeah, I don't think it's a big problem, but they've got to do it. They want to do everything by the book for the Olympics. I really don't think it will be in the Olympics for a long, long time. We're way behind a lot of other sports. There's not enough participation. Somebody said online, luckily they took it down, was that they were saying it didn't make the Olympics because of infighting and things, which is just not true. The IOC have no idea which countries are fighting with each other behind the scenes unless somebody goes and tells them, and that's not one of the criteria. They can't get involved in politics. There'll always be politics, and unfortunately, whenever you go to these tournaments and you're young and enthusiastic, there's always these old men around, and you think, how do they make a living out of it? Sumo is something that's difficult to make a living out of in amateur sumo, and there's only a handful of people that I know that are doing it. I know there's one in the US that sort of keeps a lot of the profits for himself and doesn't share it around. So the poor guys are having to fund their own way to tournaments and drive across the country. And hopefully they'll get there. I think we should start hitting up a few billionaires for funding.
Aye, aye, that would be a wee bit all right if we could manage to do that. So Adam, could you explain to our listeners the main sort of differences between Amasumo and Ozumo being amateur and professional?
Yeah, so obviously, I think the biggest difference is the weight categories. They have changed recently, and there's more weight categories being introduced in order to increase participation. Really, you know, the stereotypical categories were minus 70 kilograms. Sorry for any of the North American listeners that work in pounds. I haven't got that to hand. I should have probably thought about that. So it was minus 70, minus 85, minus 115, and then plus 115. But quite quickly, a minus 100 was chucked in there. I've competed at a European Championships in minus 92. There's been a minus 77 involved. So I think they're trying to open up the weight categories to get more participation as well. You know, there's a lot less ring ceremony and ritual in amateur sumo. A little bit in it, but not as much. But essentially, you know, same rules. Push your opponent out, you win. Get them to touch the floor, and then anything other than sole of the feet, you win. There's not much coloured moashi. It tends to be black or white. Something that's always struck me as being odd, obviously, the white moashi reserved for the highest level in Ozumo, those in the top two divisions. There's very limited kesho moashi, although some competitions, the Europeans this year had, just for the opening ceremony, one kesho moashi representing each nation in terms of the national flag. But in terms of rules, it is pretty similar, but I'm sure John's going to jump in and tell me quite a bit more about that.
Aye. John.
Yeah, the main difference in the rules is, well, firstly, at the tachi-ai, in Japan, they trust each other, and they synchronize breathing, and they go on instinct, where none of us foreigners would trust anyone else. So the gyoji actually has to start us. So he makes us put the hands down on the ground first. And yeah, if it's not all synchronized, then he pulls his hand away, and then you go. And the other thing with, basically the rules are pretty much the same, but from a safety point of view, with the slapping, in amateur sumo, your slaps are only allowed to start from the shoulder width apart. So start at the shoulders into the face, not big roundhouse slaps or big face palms. I mean, it's not to say it doesn't happen. It depends on whether or not the gyoji's going to pick it up or stop the bout. They might redo it. It's meant to actually be instant disqualification. But yeah, there have been some very, very rough bouts over the time, over the years, like in medal bouts where there's a lot on the line. So they're always fun to watch, but it can be brutal.
I remember the big one, John, with your friend. Is it Gentugs and Stilian, the Bulgarian?
Yeah.
Had to be reset, didn't it? Because of some wild slapping. Yeah.
That was incredible. I just wish I was a bit closer and had a better camera for that, but I got it all on film. That was extraordinary because, yeah, once, I mean, you probably know from pub fights when you're Scott that if you hit someone in the nose, it's very difficult to fight after that, especially if they're bleeding or if you get them in the eye. So safety is a big issue. It's very important in amateur sumo because we're not trained to do the slapping. As Minami Noshima told me, it can take 2 years to get good at the proper supari because it's almost like a hook, but you've got your arm, not a hook, sorry, a jab, and you've got to put your whole body behind it. So it's got the power of a 1-inch punch, but with everything, you become one unit. So yeah, we're not meant to celebrate too much. It does happen. You see the university teams, there's a lot of camaraderie, and they do tend to do a little jig and go off once they win tournaments. But that's really the extent of it. There's no sledging. Your mum wears army boots or whatever upsets people these days.
Your dad sells Avon. is a classic in Scotland that your da sells the Avon. I don't know why that's used, but apparently your da sells Avon is super offensive in Scotland. I mean, and I would be offended at your wee comment there, mate, about I'd know with bar brawls about broken noses and breathing. I would be offended if not for the fact that I've had my nose broke multiple times myself in these situations.
That's what I was taught. The first thing you do is whack someone in the nose and run because their eyes start to tear up.
Headbutt, you've blinded them and messed with their breathing. Headbutt, that's as soon as you do it, that's why they call it the Glasgow kiss, know what I mean? Give them a wee nip, know what I mean?
Yeah, you rarely see anyone deliberately trying to hurt people. I have seen a couple of very dodgy things, people putting things underneath their bandages to...
See, speaking of dodgy things, by the way, have you seen a couple of Adam's bouts? He's knocked a couple of guys out with throwing his head about. There's a video I'm going to, Adam, I'll get you to send me it and I'll actually play it as I'm talking about this now. But that guy, you know, I mean, Adam, he beat his cell in the match because look, when he was pushing, he ended up the sheer velocity kind of swung his cell out the dohyo. But I mean, the guy fell like a slat of wood off a fence, like a cartoon character, straight down, boom. And he got up and didn't know where he was. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that was a semi-final of a competition. It was a guy called Stillian, who I mentioned earlier, in Bulgaria. Yeah, look, thankfully he was all right. He was a really nice guy, him as well. Thankfully he was all right after that, but it did rock him a little bit.
Rock him. He was dead-bodied. Honestly, like, you'll say rock him just as that video plays on the visual of this podcast, and people are going to laugh.
I had somebody try, I think they were Mainomi, they jumped up, or Tobizaru or whatever, they jumped up in the air. I came in underneath and literally pushed him, and he kept going and landed flat on his back outside of the dohyo. So he wasn't fast enough to land before I could get in underneath him. I just sent him into space. So it's, a lot of people try to imitate their favorites, and that doesn't always work. And also, yeah, just being, it is good to copy the styles of other people, but you've really got to find your own style. That's the strange thing about sumo, is it doesn't have kata. Like you practice one move over and over and over again. You've just kind of got to find whether you're an oshi specialist with pushing, or a yotsu specialist on the belt. You kind of got to find that on your own. So if you're an all-rounder, then that's when you become more lethal.
So John, tell me this. See in Japan, see when it comes to recruiting new guys for sumo, it's a wee bit different on how we might do it in amateur, because in amateur, obviously, it's open to any age, any people for any walk of life sort of thing. But there's certain ways they go about it in Japan. They especially don't just seem to hunt for just the bigger guys. Can you tell us a wee bit more about that, mate?
Yeah, they definitely don't just walk around and go, oh, there's a big fellow, let's take him. They want to start with a clean canvas. So that, and obviously Hakuho, when he started, was even less than that. He was just a little twig that they didn't want to know. So if they've got a bit of genetics behind them, but they take on all body types because they have different styles for each body type. So if you've got somebody that's already large, they usually have to have done extraordinary things to be able to be chosen. Because I know myself, I was crap in the beginning, so I put on a bit of weight, and then I actually found that your tendons and your ligaments and things get to a point where they can't handle it, and you start getting injuries. I've discovered that when I was doing judo, I wasn't as agile for all the judo throws, and then I realized, well, time to go back down to lightweight and build it up from there. Because so what the stable masters do is they feed them up, and they do it all scientifically. Well, they don't really put that much science behind it, but they've got the tradition of eating the chunko, hundreds of years of eating chunko, going to bed on a full stomach and building up the soft fat while they've still got the soft puppy fat on the outside, while they've still got a very good, decent muscle mass that actually works, and the being flexible and agile makes a big difference. So yeah, it's good to see a lot of big people getting into sumo, and it helps keep them alive and keep them mobile. But you can be limited unless you start to do the stretches or of it being able to do it in the past, where the muscle memory kicks in.
Aye.
I know as I'm getting older, it doesn't take that long to get back into it, but you've at least got to have done something along the way. Like, you can't just sort of your training can't be at McDonald's.
Aye, it's being athletic is a lot more important than having a large size in sumo, even though in most cases the end goal is to be larger, especially in the professional ranks, which isn't required in amateur, because thankfully the weight classes allow for a lot more types of people to come and join in.
Well, that's one thing about amateur sumo. It took me a few years to fully understand why they had the weight divisions, and you always thought the open weight and heavyweight were more prestigious. But then I realized it was, Adam, you'd probably know the Dutch team, when they had a bit of money, they were all quite lean athletes, and they didn't really have a heavyweight apart from Hytham, who was quite good. He was a medalist. So they were putting as much effort into their lightweights. And then I realized that the lightweight competition around the world is just as legitimate as any other division. And that's the same also with the amateur sumo in Japan. So they're more looking at the people rather than just the big sizes. Of course, we love to see a big bout between behemoths, because the impact is like a car accident at about 60 kilometers an hour.
And on that note, that's all we've got time for our episode on amateur sumo. Thanks everybody for tuning in and listening and spending your time with us. Thanks to my co-host John Traill, as always, for joining and sharing his knowledge, and of course Adam Lloyd for chiming in and helping us out with his extensive knowledge on Amasumo as well. Thanks again, guys.
No, you're welcome. Just any listeners, find out where your local club is, get participating, or go down and support if you're not wanting to participate. You'll love amateur sumo. It's a great sport, and it really is a sport that caters for everybody.
Brilliant, it definitely is. I couldn't agree more, mate. John, thanks very much for joining me again and all, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. As we say, pants down or piss off.
Pants down or piss off, mate. That's the one. That's the one. Unless you're sharing Mawashi, then it becomes a wee bit of a problem. You know what I mean? Because I'm not putting MDLC skid marks on my ass, right?
There you go. Do you know the Rosella soup? They had an old way of telling whether the vegetables were fresh. If they snap, they're in. If they bend, they're out. So it's the opposite with a mawashi. If it snaps, it's out. If it bends, it's in.
And on that note, everybody, thanks again. See you in the next one.